Thank you very much for the performance. There are many things I enjoyed in it, so I think I should start by just saying what they were. And the first was how much commitment and intensity you brought to playing this complex Bach Allemande. And something that was interesting for me to hear was the commitment you have to a certain kind of uninterrupted flow, which is, I think, very particular to this piece. Now, there's a certain tradition of playing this piece that goes back to some slightly later copies of the music, in which it's played very slowly indeed, perhaps half the speed of a traditional Allemande that's just in 16th notes, like so that's one approach that you often hear, and I think it's a very valid way of playing the piece, but it's not your way, and there's a lot to be said for keeping a sense of the movement from one quarter note to the next rather than 1/8 note to the next. So your performance is still slower than the regular Allemande, but with some attention to the expectations of an Allemande pulse in quarter notes. So I thought that was very interesting. It's something I've thought about quite a lot in this piece myself. Something else I enjoyed was really the same idea, a lot of direction you're bringing to the music. So moments when you're going like these kinds of gestures, which are very strongly directed. Getting that sense of direction, I think, is absolutely crucial to this piece. But the last thing that I wanted to mention was just knowing that you work directly with the cello original. And that to me is crucial at this level. I'm often asked to recommend an edition of the Sixth Cello Suite or the Chaconne, or some big Bach piece. And of course there are countless fine editions that I could recommend, but I personally would only use them for reference. Music of this depth requires a level of engagement in which you come up with your own unique solutions. So these are lots of things that I enjoyed, and much else besides. So the question arises, where is there room for improvement? So what I'd like to do is focus on issues of accuracy, pitch, rhythm, and then I'd like to go a bit further and talk about how to work on this piece so that it becomes easy to catch little inaccuracies that creep in. And yet at the same time, as part of that, very organically, to make deeper discoveries that help you the expression too. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm putting up a copy of the music that is more or less the cello original, simply in treble clef, so it could be played by a guitarist. And I think you worked directly with the cello score. And the reason I'm putting this up is just so that we can cross-check a few details.
Okay, so I'll just start.
At this point, I showed Thatcher a copy of the cello original, notated in treble clef for guitar, with highlights where notes needed to be corrected. He immediately made the necessary corrections at sight, and as he did so, he related them to their harmonic surroundings. We rejoined the lesson at the point where we need to address a few rhythmic inaccuracies.
That's an E now.
Now next, let's look a little bit about the question of the pulse, because I know that it sounds like part of your vision for this music is that the pulse will get faster and slower at different times.
Correct.
But I do think that there are some places where maybe unintentionally you're actually moving from one note value to another. Like, for example, a quarter note becomes an eighth note, or an eighth note becomes a 16th note. And that's what the listener hears. So in a way, what I want to share with you is what you're communicating to me as a listener, and that I don't think you're intending. So they mostly have to do with long notes. So I've put up another copy of the music, and these are just some places where what I'm hearing is basically something at double speed.
Okay, I see.
And you can see that almost all of them involve, not all of them, but almost all of them involve a dotted eighth.
Sure.
Where I think what I'm not hearing is time for that second eighth note click, in the middle of the beat.
Sure.
To arrive, and then we play, right? So
right. So like in the beginning of that would be measure 2, 1, 2, and as opposed to like rushing.
Play the first measure so you can establish what your eighth note pulse is.
Okay.
Okay. Now that was a dotted 16th and a 32nd. Because your eighth note pulse, you made it very clear. It's dum, dum. Right? If that's an eighth note, and 2. Then, but measure 2 is 1 and 2. Right?
Sure. Okay, so
see what that's like.
Was that better?
We haven't got to the place yet.
Oh, sorry.
We're looking at this rhythm, aren't we? I think you...
More like that, if we were to subdivide it?
Well, now you're going bom, 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 bom. If that was your eighth note, then the piece would begin like this. You're literally going to double speed. Yeah, so... That's it.
Okay, good.
Okay, can I interrupt?
Sure, of course.
So again, remembering that it's easiest to... we talked about the importance of the quarter note pulse earlier, but just for now, it's easy to think about the eighth note. Remember, the eighth note is 1 and 2 and. That's what you're announcing for the listener to go by at the beginning of the piece.
Sure.
Which means that when we come to this measure, 1 and 1 and 2 and. Does that make sense?
Yes. Could I hear you do that just one more time, just to get an extra reference?
Yeah. And also, remember, whenever you're in doubt, Thatcher, come back to a place where you're really confident that you are feeling the pulse the way you want to. So at the beginning you're going 1 and 2. Right? That's kind of what you're doing, I think. Something like that.
Yes.
So if you keep coming back to that, that gives you your grid, and then you say to yourself 1 and 2, and then you play 1 and 2 and 1, 3. Yeah, so it's very spacious.
All right.
So can you give me that space?
Sure.
There you go. Yeah. Now, can I point something out?
Sure.
In this measure here, you did a beautifully accurate dotted eighth, followed by a dissonance. It's a beautiful moment in the piece. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Bach is echoing that same gesture here. So when you play it the way you just played it, with the pulse really in place, we're able to make that connection. Right, you hear how the two moments are the same motive, the same rhythmic gesture.
Yes.
Right, and now that's there in your performance. So why don't we look at one or two more of these? It's always the same dotted rhythm. Now you're starting to get a sense of, okay, you've got a model for a good dotted rhythm. You actually are doing it. Let me get rid of some of the paint in the score.
Sure.
So you've given me a beautifully mapped dotted rhythm against the grid of the eighth note there. So now, can you build on that and give me the same relationship in this measure here, in the middle of the second reprise?
Was that better?
Much, much better. Does it seem different to you?
It seems different, obviously, because, I have the previous way ingrained in my memory. But, with a few reps, it'll get, it'll replace.
But that's what I want to know, that it really is a different experience, because it's a very different experience for the listener. And hopefully it's a very different experience of traversing the pulse of this piece. Shall we do the last one? So here, there's yet another one of these dotted eighths.
All right. Okay, I think I know where... More like that?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, now that's almost all of the ones that I've marked. Let's just check out a couple of places where 32nd notes are becoming 64th notes. So the first one is actually in the first measure.
Okay.
What I think you're doing is playing something like that. What I'm hearing is a lot of 64th notes coming from the previous beat. Perhaps so that you can make time for the trill. It's certainly plausible as music, but my emphasis here is not so much on what's plausible or what's a legitimate degree of freedom, but just whether you're aware of what you're doing, right? Because awareness is the only way we can make progress on this music. So it's presumably... See how I'm distinguishing between the 32nds and the 64ths here. Do you want to try? That's it.
Was that better?
Yeah, good. So when you get to go you don't have a lot of time left in the beat compared with what you were doing before, but you have enough time, and I think you're doing just fine. So the only other place, we already addressed this beat here. I would like to check out towards the end. I think there's a bit of an alliance here between you wanting to push the pulse forward because, the the music does have a sense of great forward movement in the harmony there. But I think in your enthusiasm, what I'm hearing is kind of an abrupt, a rather abrupt change from what I perceive to be the 32nd notes of the previous measure to 64th notes. So if you're going right, those are all the 32nd notes, and what I think you're doing is more like, you know, really moving quickly through those to the point where we're hearing a different value. We're not really hearing you push so much as a different rhythm.
Right.
And that's what I want to try and address.
Okay.
So those are some really great changes. I mean, I can hear you still applying some of the pushing and pulling. That's part of your, you know, your vision for this music. But I can follow it much more. You're taking me with you much more convincingly, you know, than before. Where I think I was, as I say, not actually hearing pushing so much as just now we've gone to 64th notes.
Of
and
course.
Then actually, paradoxically, the pulse stays more steady that way.
Yes.
So now let's all of that was quite mechanical in a way, and you did a great job of making these corrections very quickly and easily. So clearly your reading is well up to the task of figuring out all of this complex notation. Let's talk a little bit about I like to think of it as the alarm system, because we all learn wrong notes and wrong rhythms, and sometimes we only discover them, you know, years after learning a piece, and you think, oh my goodness, I've always played that note, I've always played that rhythm, and so the question is there a way of sensing? And so the question is there a way of sensing that something isn't right, something's amiss as we play the music, something doesn't feel the way an Allemande should feel, or the way Bach's music should sound, or something like that. And so what I want to do is work with you a little bit on what I think is the most important learning tool for pretty much any Bach piece, and potentially all tonal pieces, which is to make a harmonic and rhythmic reduction of the music. That's what would a if someone was playing the organ or the harpsichord with this piece and providing an accompaniment, what basics, they would just be playing the basic harmonies and maybe the basic voice leading of the piece and the bass in full. And what would they be playing? So if we were together in an in-person lesson, then I would probably just have you play the piece while I played along. We could kind of work on it in a very improvisatory way, just exploring. But I've started to realize just how helpful it is to ask students to write these things out and so on. I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but I will share with you some of my own work. But I'll walk you through the process a little bit.
Okay.
First of all, something that I think one wants to do hundreds of times in a piece like this is to skim off the top level of ornamentation. We can see, just glancing at the score, that this is a highly ornate piece. It's obvious from the look of it that Bach is overlaying all of this ornamental decorative writing over something more, over a simple structure. And we want to discover and actually play that simple structure. But to start off with, actually, a great way to go is just to move everything up to the level up the rhythmic pyramid. So if you see 32nd notes, reduce it to 16th notes, to a simpler version in 16th notes. And if you see 16th notes somewhere, see if you can make a simpler version in 8th notes. So for example, the first measure might be, I should have prepared this earlier, of course, so give me a couple of attempts, but
no problem.
Let's say 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. To that big cadence there. Do you see what I'm doing?
Yes, you're taking out a lot of the more, as you use the word, decorative or ornamental stuff, and trying to almost like reduce the melody down to its simplest form. So rather than playing, I think you did. Or something you did something
exactly.
Much simpler. I think that's
no, something like that. Do you want to? And now, if I did it again, I would do it slightly differently.
Sure.
I might be tempted to write out a version to show to a student, in which case I'd probably put a lot of thought into it and like try and do it really beautifully. But ultimately, it's a mixture between like a skill, a definable skill, and an art.
Sure.
You're trying to capture something about the way this piece goes in a simpler form, and I know I wanted to bring it up with you because I know you're a composer, and so in a way I want you to kind of become Bach a little bit, because Bach often he often wrote pieces in a simple form, and then years later would decide to use them again, and then add a lot of extra written out embellishment of this sort. And so actually we're doing something very much in the way that Bach worked. Do you want to just try? Just give it a go. We don't have to play it to the public if it doesn't work out.
Sure, I'll see what I can do.
Okay, wait a minute. Yeah,
yes.
Very, very good. Great first attempt. Now, let me make a couple of suggestions.
Sure.
Sometimes when there's a lot of notes to boil down, what I was hearing was that you actually got, by my count, to the next beat, but you still played more notes, so you kind of were adding an extra eighth note or so. For example, if I go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and it's time for 1 now, isn't it? So if I go,
yes, it is.
Right, that was extra time that I shouldn't be using.
Yes.
Let me play for you Well, do you want to just have a go, or do you want me to do another version for you to listen to?
Why don't you do another, and then I'll give it another try.
Okay, and hopefully it'll be true that I do it slightly differently. Do you feel that kind of slow, calm pulse just kind of permeates it? It's much easier to find that. Of course, I want to put all of Bach's notes back at some point, but I think it's wonderful to do it on the basis of this foundation.
Sure. I'll give it another go. This time I'll focus more on the meter than the actual notes.
That's great, yeah. I think you'll do very well with that. Just if you've run out of beat, just go on to the next beat.
Sure.
Wait. So
I won out of time.
Yeah. And it's 3 there.
Sorry. Give me one more go, and then.
Yeah, of course. You're doing great. This is wonderful. There was another long beat there. So 3 and 4, 1. So it's that third beat. It's there's a lot of notes Bach writes. So
all right.
I just went, yeah.
Sure. Why don't I do it one more time? This time I'll count out loud, just to try to do it a little more academically.
Oh, if you can do that, that would be great. Counting is actually a really nice way.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. That's a pretty straightforward gesture, but if I were to simplify it, well, that's just playing it sort of a different.
Yeah, well, actually, when Bach has internal cadences that are not like the very strong cadences that you encounter at the ends of major sections, he loves to put these kinds of French endings, where instead of writing pom, he'll sometimes write pom, pom, and sometimes they have grace notes. And sometimes they're written out as here.
Sure.
So you can actually just play dum pum, and that would be like the unornamented French ending that you encounter in Bach dances very often. And then it makes a new start. Yeah. That was. It's getting better and better each time. You're getting more and more. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, so this is really, really hard, and you're doing a wonderful job. There were 1 or 2 places where you still had maybe a longer beat than you'll have next time you try. But it's going so well. I think why don't we take this a step further?
Okay.
What that was like just skimming off the top of the ornamental surface. What you played was still quite ornamental.
Right.
Still contained various passing notes and neighbor notes and kind of figuration. And what I want to get to, but already I think it's very, very useful because it's giving you a sense of what one of my teachers used to call the rotation of the bar, right? What we're hearing now, it has much more the feeling of an Allemande, of a dance that ultimately comes from physical movement through space, that describes some kind of cyclic pulse pattern. We have to have the feeling that although there's a long time between the first beat of each measure, that nevertheless there is a sense of something, a big wheel turning, and when it gets to complete its turn, there's the next downbeat, and then we start to turn again. And that's what I think could be much more part of your performance of this piece. And we're hearing it now, especially when you count. Actually, counting is actually, when done in a musical way, is actually far more effective than a metronome, because we can give it expression and life with our voice. 1 and 2. Now what I want to do next is get much more to the bare bones of the harmonic structure. Remember, this is about thinking about Bach working actually with some patterns of harmony and counterpoint that are found in almost all of his music, all of his pieces, which of course meant that he could write so many thousands of pieces in his lifetime, because he could focus on his invention, on his beautiful expressive decoration. And so if we can discover what those are and actually feel them under our fingers, then it really helps. So first of all, with something as simple as noticing when we're playing wrong notes or missing an accidental, right? Because suddenly it's not, no, wait, this isn't what I found when I was making a continuo version of the piece. So let me show you. For this lesson, I wrote something out so that we can take a look at it. So on the top system here is a very simple harmonic reduction of the music, and you can see that I've really gone to just the basic harmonies and the bass movements. And let me play a little bit of this first. So I've got then we have that beautiful high D. We move to B minor, which is just taking us to the dominant of A. Then a sequence starts. Then the full cadence in A. Here. And then the little flourish at the end. Now, that's just what I came up with today, and again, if I did it again from scratch, maybe I'll come up with something a little different. But I think that probably helps to give a sense. Do you want to either try to read this yourself or think what you would play at this level? It's basically, each time the chord changes, you just play one sound, right? Without any additional ornamentation. So it's entirely with the harmonic rhythm is all that we're playing here.
Right.
Almost entirely. Almost.
So, let's see. I think what you have is wonderful. So, if you were to start with a da 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 No, because that's the note change. I keep
That's it,
hearing.
yeah.
Right, so that's just factoring the note change. So.
Yeah. Beautiful. Let's take a little pause. Just because
Sure.
time is growing short.
Sure.
Now, one of the things that tends to emerge from this kind of study is that you discover that often Bach is introducing with his ornamentation a lot of variety into things that are basically quite regular. So and that helps you to discover the underlying pulse. So for example, we had a little difficulty earlier with this dotted rhythm.
Yes.
But now we know that underneath it all, if you look at the rest of the measure, we can see that Bach sets up a tenth between the
No problem.
a tenth between the bass and the treble, the A, right? Then the A is harmonized as a seventh, resolves down to a G, also harmonized as a tenth, then becomes a seventh. The G becomes a seventh. The G resolves downwards to F sharp, again harmonized as a tenth with the bass. We should expect that for the listener to hear that should have a certain kind of regular, that should tell a story that has its own simple, calm rhythm, right? So if I go right now, the way I did it then, I misread quite a few of the rhythms, and so the result was that there was a lot of unevenness between the beats. Whereas if I keep playing this hundreds of times, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and then I'm building it back up to the original, but I'm keeping that sense of pulse, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
You want to try. See if you can play the reduction, then put a little bit of Bach's original back, and then see if you can go all the way back to the original, but keep that pulse the same way.
Sure.
Actually, can you just go from measure 2? Just because we have a short amount of time. Just do this bit.
So that would be your reduction. Good. So maybe the tempo is a little fast. Right.
You can either start with the tempo you're going to end up with. I suppose you could even slow down a little bit as you go from one level to the next. But the important thing is that you feel like you're staying with this sense that you're actually walking through this piece.
Right.
And that steady movement of the legs, 1 and 2, that kind of processional feel. It can get a little faster, it can get a little slower. I'm not saying that it can't. I hate, laying down rules about this kind of thing, because we want a performance that's unique to you. But if it gets faster or gets slower, I should be able to feel it getting faster or slower, because your sense of the pulse is so firm.
Yes.
Now, let me just take this a little bit further. if we think about making a reduction of this sort, one of the things you'll notice, again, is just how very simple the line is that Bach describes in his music. So all of this ornamentation is complex and expressive and full of life and expression. In those cases, then underlying it all, there often tends to be a cantus firmus-like motion that's often just a scale. For example, here's the same reduction. And now we see, although I had to kind of slightly normalize the music, but only slightly, and we should expect that, when Bach takes a standard contrapuntal scheme and decorates it and uses it for his own purposes, occasionally he'll change a note or miss something out. But when we get to that high D, it moves down to a C sharp, then somewhere in there's a B, an A, and that takes us to a G sharp. The G sharp moves up, and then from this A we now descend again. And we get all the way down to this A. In fact, from after that cadence on the E here, Bach describes an entire octave scale, A down to A,
right,
that I think is tremendously helpful to be aware of.
Sure.
Wouldn't you agree? Do you want to? So why don't we actually go from where we just got to here? I wonder if you would like to play the reduction.
Sure.
Just noticing this scale, it's all there in the music.
Sure. So, by the so 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, no, that's too fast. Sorry.
Or 1 and 2.
2 and 3 and 4 and 2.
Now try playing the original and see if you can just give a thought to that scale, descending to that low A, descending on us like a blessing, even as you follow all of that complex, elaborate movement.
Sure. 1, 2.
What was that like?
It was interesting because obviously with the way that you wrote out the descending scale, it doesn't actually exist. Like, I actually use that technique of the descending scale a lot in my own writing, but when I use it, it's actually there, present, whereas here it's more of an implication. So it was kind of tricky when I was reading and reading the pitch to try to hear, in addition to whatever it was that I was playing, the note above. But of course, theoretically, it all makes a tremendous amount of sense. So it was interesting, and it was also nice that it was an implication because it forced me to think rather than just read off the score.
Exactly. So the notes are there, and the thing is that Bach, of course, being Bach, won't always put them on the beat. But nevertheless, they provide a very simple contrapuntal framework for the music that involves, in real life, some displacement. Very occasionally, maybe a note isn't there at all, but we can kind of think, well, it's implied by all of the other notes being there. But actually, they are all there in the case of the passage you played. But of course, sometimes Bach will skip up above the main note, sometimes below, and also he'll often have multiple threads. So we could also talk about the middle voice that I've written there, or the bass, both of which have their own story. But now, I think what I find is that, particularly as these scales often span more than one phrase or section of the music, it doesn't mean, of course, that everything will be like uniform, but it just allows you to say, okay, well, something is continuing, even as there's contrast on the surface. And one thing this is very powerful for is memorizing the music, because, of course, you're bringing the same kind of sense of a secure counterpoint that was Bach's training, which allowed him to write this kind of music. It's also going to be much, much harder, I think, to accidentally learn wrong rhythms or wrong notes, because you've got this sense. But ultimately, there's a story here that has to be told, right?
Sure.
It's as though you're telling a very simple story of how a high A went down to a low A. And as it did so, it went to here, and it went around, and it spiraled, and it did this, and it did that. But you'll notice as you go through the scale that you encounter strong points of, if I may say, leverage. For example, when we get to the E here, I've interpreted that as an E7 harmony in last inversion with D at the bottom. And it's a very typical thing in Bach, where you arrive at a chord beforehand, which would have actually made a very good chord to launch a cadence. He could have gone to E in the bass and then down to an A. But instead, scale degree 4 in the bass is reinterpreted as a seventh, falls down to scale degree 3 in the key of A, and then what we hear is Bach's, you could say, like the gold standard Baroque cadence, which is scale degrees 3, 4, 5, and 1 in the bass, which I've labelled here with these circled numbers that look like string numbers. But it's a form of notation you sometimes encounter among people that study this music and the way it's written. So what I'm thinking is that as Bach goes down the scale, instead of going like that, he goes. Do you hear that there's a sense of a lot of weight here, as if I wants to go.
Yes.
Yeah. Now let's look at Bach's actual music here. He goes. Then the motion kind of, we end up on a long note with that E. But actually, this A here stands for an awful lot in the music. It stands for the experience of hearing this sound. That's the sound in our imagination at that moment, which means that I think it can be very helpful to really help the listener, and then the cadence. those long bass notes. This is a place where I would sustain them, even though they can't be sustained by the cello. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you really arrive on that A, give me the experience of playing a suspension, and of everything kind of falling rhythmically, resulting from that arrival on that A. It's actually a dissonance over a very dissonant chord, the 4-2 chord. I truly believe that Bach is trying to convey all of that to us with just one single unaccompanied note.
Sure. So
do you want to maybe go from where I was going from, around about here, or a little earlier?
Sure.
You like?
I'll start from here. Oh, bring out the middle note. Oh, sorry.
Good. Now try the Bach's original music.
All right.
And see if you can arrive on that A, that suspension.
Sure. Could you make the screen a little bigger? The bottom line is a little hard to read clearly.
Yeah, what was that like?
That actually made a lot more. Maybe it was because I had done it the previous time, so it wasn't a completely foreign experience to me, but this one felt a lot more natural.
Yeah. So we're going to have to wrap up there. And I think obviously we went through the next section, we discover similar long lines. We could also study the cadences. And I might have
Sure.
a couple of suggestions for you in terms of just revising your arrangement and what the implied harmonies are. But
Sure.
the point is that you're on your way, right? You have a tool that you can use, not just in any Bach piece, but really in any piece. It's helpful to very carefully study the big picture voice leading of the music, even in an atonal piece. Actually, I've even done this kind of thing with Elliott Carter, and I always learn something when I do. And I think I always learn something when I try and do it, in quite some detail and quite carefully. Because, ultimately, as a composer, how important it is to have the voice leading in mind as you play, and to think about how notes connect together, even as you do all kinds of detail.
Of course.
So work more in that way, and I think you'll find that you not only will it help your learning process, help you with pulse, accuracy and all of that, but it'll also help you discover the points of emphasis in the harmony, and to control, such a long complex journey as this piece gives you.
Of course.
All right. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure and an honor.
All right, for me too. So I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Same
All right.
here.
Take care then.
You too. Bye-bye.